In 2009, which is a little while ago, a gentleman named Tim Keller published an excellent book called Counterfeit Gods. In the book, he talks about different idols and gods in our culture, and in one chapter, he talks about political idolatry. This is the other reason I alerted the security. He said, one of the signs that an object is functioning as an idol is that fear becomes one of the chief characteristics of life. When we center our lives on the idol, we become dependent on it. If our counterfeit God is threatened in any way, our response is complete panic. We do not say, oh, what a shame, or how difficult the next handful of years are going to be, but rather, this is the end, there is no hope. And we try to fix things on social media, correcting everyone who disagrees with us. This may be the reason why so many people now respond to U.S. political trends in such an extreme way. Whichever party, and you know how apolitical I am. I'm going to stay that way even today. But whatever party wins an election, there's a certain percentage of the losing side that threatens to move to Canada. Right? They put the kind of hope, because of their fear of the future, they put their hope in a political leader or policies that were once reserved for God and God alone. This is still from Keller's book. When their political leaders are out of power, they experience a sort of death. They believe that if their policies and people are not in power, everything will fall apart. And then he goes on to say, the increasing political polarization and bitterness we see in the U.S. politics today is a sign that we have made political activism into a form of religion. 2009. Has that gotten better or worse? Wow. I think he's right on. And I do believe that there are many evangelical Christians that need to repent of political idolatry. Whether that's you or not, I'll leave that between you and God. That's not my job. That's not my job. But I will make a suggestion. Let's be done with fear. Let's be done with anger or hurtful rhetoric. Let's be done with that and focus our attention on the hope of the gospel. 2 Samuel 8 is an Old Testament history lesson. I'm going to do my best today, I promise. But the bottom line is, God used a godly king, King David, to bring shalom to the people. And that's what we want. Let's stop being a part of the problem and start being part of the solution. And that doesn't involve a picket sign. It involves living abundantly, representing grace and truth well, regardless of who hangs out in the White House or wherever the other leaders live. That's what I want to talk about today. 2 Samuel 8, if you're new with us, this is pretty bizarrely rare for a sermon. But what's not rare is that we walk through books of the Bible, sometimes pretty slowly. We're trying to keep a pace of one chapter a week. And there are times where 2 Samuel makes that very difficult. And we don't skip parts, though I'd love to. Right? Not today. Today's fine. But we find ourselves in chapter 8 this morning, and the middle chapters, 8, 9, and 10 probably, of 2 Samuel are not typical Hebrew narrative. The typical Hebrew narrative is driven by a plot. These chapters are much more thematic. There's a theme that they focus on. And the purpose of that is to cause us to stop, think about the theme, think about how it fits with the larger picture, the meta-narrative of the book, and then to glean from that what it meant to them helps us know what it means and can mean to us. And that's what I hope happens today. Many refer to this particular chapter as a chapter of victories, talking about something that was relatively common in the ancient Near East, and they would just catalog the great victories of any given king, right? What David has accomplished is really quite remarkable. Verse 1 says this. Now after this came about that David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and David took control of the chief city from the hand of the Philistines. That opening line, now after this, could be simply translated over the course of time, right? The next chunk of time, this stuff happens, right? The first accomplishment it identifies is the defeat and the subduing of the Philistines. Around 1200 BC-ish or so, Egypt was declining in regional power. The Philistines were believed to be the next great power, and they were a nation that caused all kinds of pain and grief for the Israelites during Saul's reign. We saw a lot of that in 1 Samuel. We're actually told in the text that the Philistines were at war with Saul all through his duration as king. They were the reason, originally, Israel as a people asked for a human king. They wanted someone to go out and fight their battles for them and conquer their enemies, specifically the Philistines. So it's a remarkable thing that and all through Saul's reign, the Philistines defeated Israel. Now we find out that David, as a godly king who views God as king of the people, and he's a servant of the king, sitting in the king's human throne, he gets all these victories. He pushed them back deep in their own territory. He's actually conquered the city of Gath. Let me see, who was born in Gath? Anybody know? Real tall guy. Yeah, Goliath. Played for the Knicks. And so he's got the city of Gath. He's got the sea of Gath. Now they're part of David's empire. And so I should have done a map, and I'm sorry, I apologize. On the back of your Bible, there's often a map, but from the foothills west of the Jordan River all the way up to the Mediterranean, it's referred to as the coastal plain. All of that was dominated by the Philistines. Not anymore. God used David to recapture it. And now the Philistines that are left alive are subject to David as king. And in one verse, I would say, wow. Wow. Verse 2, he defeated Moab and measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground. And he measured 2 lines to put to death and 1 full line to keep alive. And the Moabites became servants to David, bringing tribute. Well, this is pleasant to talk about. Wait a minute, weren't the Moabites related to David? Yep. Do you remember he tucked his family when things were getting bad? He sent them to Moab to live with some distant relatives, if I recall. His great-grandmother has a book of the Bible named after her, Ruth. She was a Moabite. When Saul was after David, again, he took his parents to Moab and they sought refuge there. And there's Jewish tradition that somehow the Moabites killed David's parents. The Bible does not tell us that. We really don't know that for sure, but Jewish tradition suggests that. There's another line of thought that the Moabites were coming together with the Ammonites and the Edomites and all the otherites to create a force to wipe out David because he was becoming too strong too quickly. What's going on for sure we don't know. But there's this battle with the Moabites. David prevailed. And the other part that's just downright unpleasant, especially in our sensibilities culturally, is David lined them up in 3 lines and he said, yeah, these 2 should be put to death, that line should live. Ugh, that's kind of yucky. So what happens there? David killed 2/3, spared 1/3, which he did not have to do. But that's what it's probably referring to. In the ancient world, bordering enemies were bloody. It was kill or be killed. It was violent. Multiple nations in a very small area, region, and they were constantly at war with one another. When one nation defeated another nation, they for sure took out the leaders. And ideally, if they needed servants, they would capture the best of often, or as many servants as they needed, they would keep those people alive and kill the rest. Because if you didn't do that, they would simply regroup and come back and try to kill you and your family again. Again, I'm not so sure we should function that way today, but it is hard for us to read those kinds of things. We don't get it. But that's just the way it was. Anyone observe that children are different than they used to be when you were a kid? Well, how come? What happened? I blame the parents. I don't know why. But you know what your grandparents said about you? These kids these days, right? I love reading some of the articles about school behavior in 1960 and these rebellious youth who think they know it all and will actually chew gum in school when they're told not to. I'd take that today, wouldn't you? Ooh, baby. This is the way it was. And it's hard to be okay with it. By the way, it takes great resources to take good care of slaves so they stay healthy and actually function well. And again, the Bible does not promote slavery. It describes when it happened. Okay? Don't do that. The point of the verse is this: the Moabites became servants and gave tribute, which means they relented and said, yes, we will be David's subject. He will be our king. That's the real punchline here. They're submissive to David's growing empire. And David was actually merciful in allowing a third of them to live, because it doesn't say that he took them as slaves. And that way they could continue their lineage and possibly turn their hearts toward God. Verse 3, all the way to 8. I should have Isaac read this, but I'm going to plow through. Ready? Then David defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, the king of Zobah, and he went to restore his rule at the river. David captured from him 1,700 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers, and David hamstrung the chariot horses, but reserved enough of them for 100 chariots. So when the Arameans of Damascus came to help, I'm going to call him Had from now on, Had, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 Arameans. And David put garrisons among the Arameans of Damascus, and the Arameans became servants to David, bringing tribute. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. David took the shields of gold, which were carried by the servants of Had, and brought them to Jerusalem. From Betah to Berothtai, cities of Had, King David took a very large amount of bronze. I wish that was the most difficult passage we're reading today. Why did David hamstring the horses? So they couldn't be used for war. But the king of Israel was not supposed to build his military up too much. Now, he saved a couple, probably 200. I figure 2 horses per chariot, probably. So he saved 200, but he did it God's way. He did not trust in a massive military. He didn't do what God told him not to do. That's pretty powerful. So now geographically, we move even more north on your imaginary maps in the back of your Bible, and we go all the way to the Euphrates River, a massive amount of territory to the north. King had it. The Arameans, I have no idea, came to Damascus to help. David conquers all of that. And again, the idea of them being tribute is that they submit their will to him as king. They're now subjects. They're surrendered to David as king. And there's all these spoils of victories. Wherever he went, the Lord helped him. That's the main focus of that phrase. There's this reminder that it's not David's skill, it's David's faith in God and his request that God would help him. Now, David, surrendered to God as king, is experiencing, quite frankly, unimaginable victories, one from another. 9 to 12. Now when Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated all the army of Had, Toi sent Joram, his son, to King David to greet him and bless him because he had fought against Had and defeated him. For had been at war with Toi. And Joram brought with him articles of silver, of gold, and of bronze. King David also dedicated these to the Lord with the silver and gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued. From Aram and Moab and the sons of Ammon and the Philistines and Amalek, and from the spoil of Had, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah. So Toi, who is at war with Had, David beats up Had, and Toi sends his son to David to say, hey, thanks, but let's not you and us fight. We're just gonna be your subjects. Okay? He willingly surrenders, acknowledges David as king, and he sends tribute that David would have gotten anyway had he killed a bunch of them, right? So David is amassing a tremendous amount of wealth as the spoils of war. And what does he do with this? Do you remember one of the things that got Saul into trouble? Is he kept stuff he wasn't supposed to keep. Saul says, well, I've done everything that God wanted me to. And the prophet says, well, what's that sound I hear? I hear a whole flock of sheep, a whole herd of sheep. And he wasn't supposed to keep those. What's David doing? He's offering them to the Lord. He's doing it the right way. Saul was selfish and greedy. David's taking care. David's even taking care of the people he conquered, which he did not have to do. So there's a tremendous wealth. He's submitted it to God as an act of worship. And that's his spirit. That's his frame of mind through all this. This is God's. This isn't mine. This is God's. Verse 13 and 14. So David made a name for himself when he returned from killing 18,000 Arameans in the Valley of Salt. He put garrisons in Edom. And all Edom, he had garrisons, and all the Edomites became servants to David. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. Well, now we have some repetition. And whenever a Hebrew narrative has repetition, it's to emphasize it, right? God is doing this, utilizing David as his servant to provide peace for his people. Repetition of that significant phrase, God's giving victory to David, because of David's faith in God as king. It's remarkable. Now on the map, what we're talking about is from the foothills all the way west to the Mediterranean Sea. The coastal plains, David had conquered. South is Edom, which David has conquered. Southeast, directly crossing the Dead Sea, the Edomites, right above them, the Ammonites, right above them. I'm saying this wrong, I'm just certain. The Arameans and the Amalekites. And those two, they're basically mercenaries. They're like terrorists that just show up and will help your army kill people. That's what's happening. David has literally conquered every nation, north, south, east, and west. This is the closest that the nation of Israel ever comes pre-millennial kingdom to possessing all the land that God had promised them, and he promised Abraham. What happens under David is remarkable. It's unbelievable. And yet it's true. In geopolitical terms, David started out as a tribal king, and then the two nations unified and became king of a nation. And then he moved to a king of multiple nations. And now he has ultimately built an empire. He controls this entire geographical territory, which was previously thought impossible. So the question arises, what will David do with his newfound power, fame, wealth? Verse 15 to 18. So David reigned over all of Israel, and David administered justice and righteousness for all his people. Joab, sons of Zeruiah, was over the army, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahulid, was recorder. Zadok, the son of Ahtub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were priests, and Sariah was secretary. Benaniah was the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. Well, now he's just telling you what his presidential cabinet was, by and large, right? This guy's in charge of agriculture, this guy's in charge of... That's what's going on here. But as he moves from this tribal organization to now running an empire, wait, watch. There we go, we're getting close. These are just players in his empire. The significant statement is twofold. One, David ruled over all Israel, which would be a reference to all those under his reign, including the conquered nations, and administered justice and righteousness for all his people. Now, if you've been attending our services for any length of time, you know that justice and righteousness are not just two descriptors. They're technical terms that describe what the Bible calls shalom. When we think of shalom, we think of peace. Shalom is far more than an absence of conflict, though. It's a place of mutual flourishing. It's the world as God intended it to be. We talked about that a little bit last week for Easter. The word justice is the Hebrew word misfat, and I'm probably saying that wrong too. But it means true justice, regardless of your race, gender, socioeconomic status. This is true justice. And it's determined by a standard of righteousness. It's just truth, not your truth. Another sermon for another time. And this is a form of the word, and I'm going to reach out. I'm done screwing all this up. Oh, Isaac's teaching, isn't he? How would I say T-Z-A-D-I-K? Say it again. One. Yeah, that. It's a form of that word. And that means a righteous person. And a form of this word which means righteousness or a righteous behavior. It's justice in the land because God is king. He determines righteousness, the standard, and he determines what righteous behavior is. That's true justice in the land. People that would function in a way that allowed both sides or whoever to flourish, they were loving life. People that tried to ruin shalom would be dealt justly with and punished. There'd be consequences. This is the high point of flourishing in the Middle East, right? In many ways, they would never experience this again. Yet, God's promises to Israel are going to be true as they come in the future. But this is a significant time in their history. And actually, it's the fulfillment of a verse we had last time we looked at 2 Samuel in 2 Samuel 7:10. I'll let you look at that yourself. And so you may say, well, I don't know. Doesn't seem like a whole lot of flourishing for the Ammonites and the Edomites and the Moabites and the Philistines. Let's talk about that. A lot of nations in a small geographic area, constant fighting and warfare. There were pagan nations that were all about bloodshed and warfare. That's what they did for their job and their hobby. That's all they cared about. And you lived in constant fear of violence from outside themselves. And then there was a constant fear of violence from the inside, right? Like I warned our security team today. There was a threat of that from the inside and someone trying to have a coup and take over so that their version of truth could win. Virtually no way these people could flourish. Imagine a classroom full of elementary children. I imagined that yesterday at the Mario movie. All but saw it. But imagine no teacher all day. Let's say third grade. Okay? What is the chance that all the students are going to flourish? Slim to none. And really, none to no way is closer. Eventually, the pecking order takes over. And there will be many of those students who would feel unsafe and feel like they're not able to flourish, right? I hear about bullying all the time in multiple schools, in good old-fashioned Utah. Not everyone gets to flourish. But then a teacher, a skillful teacher in particular, steps into the classroom. This teacher becomes, they have the authority to bring out order out of the chaos, bring out the best of the students at whatever level they're at, and cultivate an environment where every student can at least feel safe and potentially have the opportunity to flourish in that classroom. Impossible without the teacher's presence. That's the illustration with all these nations. What David did in conquering the region was to use his newfound power and position to bring true justice and righteousness for anyone who wanted it and who would play by the rules to pursue shalom. The Moabites had the third that were left alive, had an opportunity to flourish. But those that were determined to do violence to shalom, they received justice. They're punished. The only way shalom can work is if there's a true sense of justice in the land, right? There's so much we can learn about this. After 50 or 60 years prior to this moment, the nation Israel wanted And they wanted this human king, and now their longing is realized. It's the longing in every human heart to some degree for safety, security, belonging, like we saw in the video of the foster kid. They wanted a place where they could flourish, feel safe, raise a family, love one another. But they believed the pathway to that was to reject God as king and have a human king instead. That was the choice they made. And for 40 years under King Saul, they were constantly at war, no flourishing, constantly fearing for their lives, no justice in the land, not even from Saul, asked the priest that he killed. Life was miserable. Apart from the intervention of God, Israel would have been eradicated as a people. But God was up to something. He prepared for nearly 2 decades, this guy at his School of Wilderness Training program. And David becomes king. Now there's a new leader. Leadership matters. This leader had a heart for God, and he called the heart of the people back to God. And God would be king. There would be God's righteousness, but there would be God's justice as well. And God would be the one worshiped, trusted in. I'm out of time, so I'm going to do this way. Somewhere in the 60s, culture watchers almost unanimously agree that something fundamentally changed in our nation, the U.S. Deep within the human heart was this longing for peace and safety and security, and a world where we could all flourish together. But the way our culture decided that would best happen was to be our own king. We rejected God as king, tossed him out of the public school system for prayer, and we wanted to be our own God. We thought that was the pathway to deliver heaven on earth. How's that going? Not real well. So now everyone gets this, they're free to decide for themselves what's right and the wrong, how they identify, and all those kinds of things. Pluralism and relativism. Your truth is elevated, and it's small t truth. There is no absolute truth. There's no potential for justice. But the problem is it's not a theory anymore. It's a reality. It's not a theory. But something went wrong, because I sure think things are unraveling. Now, I'm not going to have fear. I'm not going to have anger. I'm going to pursue shalom. I'm going to pursue me flourishing. I'm going to pursue you flourishing. And I'm going to pursue whatever that means, them flourishing. That's pie in the sky. It'll never happen. No, it won't if they don't turn their hearts to God. But me yelling at them or telling them how dumb they are isn't going to turn their hearts to God either. Secular worldview believes that people are ultimately good, inherently good. It's just their environment that makes them bad. They're wrong. The Bible says that people are inherently sinful. And I'm going to advantage myself even if it disadvantages you. We have to be really careful not to go back to the law of the jungle. Because what we do to people, other than killing them, is not a lot better than what was happening in these ancient cultures when you overtook a people. And so people pass a bunch of laws, and there's a cycle of legalism in the life of individuals. And there's all kinds of things that happen, that my way is the only way, or my way is certainly the best way. And it just, the human heart is not going to change unless it submits itself to God as king. David was a great king. He wasn't a perfect king. He'd mess up big time. We'll get to that soon enough in a couple chapters. But chapter 7 reminds us that in the line of David, a perfect king would come. His name would be Jesus. And he would offer, remember what the angels sang to the shepherds? He's going to bring peace on earth. And people could flourish as God intended. Jesus did not come to start a new religion. Anything but. He came to seek and save the lost. It's equally offered to anyone who will respond to him and his offer of having his son pay for your sins. That's how you experience life as God intended it to be. Jesus then assigns his followers, the church, the task, the mission to continue building his work, his kingdom, offering this flourishing to other people. And someday that'll happen, but we're left to do a job. And the application points, and I'm kind of rushing through some of this. I don't know what I did. I probably waxed too eloquent on the announcements. But I need to be done with anger. I need to be done with fear and hurtful rhetoric. The enemy has found a way to distract God's people from building God's kingdom, and we now try to fix Earth's kingdom. There's no hope for this culture unless the church does the job God gave it. Second, if you can't control yourself on social media, do all of us who are trying to share Christ with our friends a favor. Get off. Stop it. Now, I was never really ranty on social media. I was on social media so I didn't miss a bunch of your birthdays, which I miss all the time now, sorry, because I'm not on social media. Do a social media detox. I said that for the Christmas season. And to my knowledge, no one did that. And that's okay. But for sure, the hurtful rhetoric, it's got to stop. You're not fixing anyone. And they're not helping you. And so here's the last assignment. Think about the environments God has called us to. David was called to be the king of Israel. And in that environment, he did his dead level best to bring shalom to the people under his care. That's what I think he's called us to. Your family, your job place, if you have a business, your neighborhood, your school, your team, your dorm, your workplace, whatever, your community, whatever it is God has given you influence in. Be faithful to the mission of living shalom and offering shalom. These are difficult times in our nation, but they're an opportunity for us. The darker it is, the easier it is to be a light in a very real sense. It's easy to be known as different with as bizarre as our culture is becoming. I've got to be true to the assignment. I want to be a messenger of grace and truth to the people in their lives. And if we do that, God will entrust people in this valley to us to offer them an opportunity to flourish by his standard. Get it? God, I pray that we do. Help those who struggle, which is most of us, and help me set an example that is undeniable. If there's anyone here who doesn't know you, God, if there's anyone here that this has just been so bizarre, I pray that you'd encourage them to come up and be prayed with, prayed for. And I pray that you'll use our church to help people flourish as you intended. And all God's people said, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, and